All right, let's jump right into this explainer for Lesson 4. If you've ever had to write a research paper or just navigate a university library, you've likely participated in the phenomenon we're exploring today, the fascinating and often highly debated dual reality of English as the global language of academia. So is it this highly efficient, neutral global code that allows us to effortlessly exchange knowledge, or is it a looming threat, a sort of linguistic Tyrannosaurus Rex, ready to devour local academic languages? Here's our roadmap for today. We're going to look at the global academic language, its role as a unifying code, the massive publishing divide, the threat to local languages, and finally, how non-native speakers are reclaiming the lingua franca. Let's get to it. Section 1. The global academic language. Let's just set the stage by looking at exactly how massive the footprint of English really is in the world of research and higher education. The sheer scale here is honestly staggering. Higher education has just exploded globally. I mean, by the early 90s, foreign nationals actually outnumbered American students studying science and engineering in U.S. graduate schools. And fast forward to 2004, we're talking over 1 million students studying in English outside their home countries. This huge migration has driven a massive need for English for academic purposes. And, it's not just the US and the UK anymore. Places like Germany, France, and Malaysia are actually offering courses in English just to compete for these overseas students. Now, all this rapid growth brings up a huge ideological split among experts. It really boils down to two perspectives: development versus dependence. So, on the development side, you have to ask, is English just this impartial, handy tool for global inclusion? Does it just help scholars step onto the world stage? Or, and here's the dependence angle, is it actually a sort of Trojan horse carrying imperialist values that subtly forces reliance on Western institutions? It's a heavy question, but keep that in the back of your mind as we go through this explainer. Moving on to Section 2. An efficient, unifying code. Let's look at the really strong argument that having a single academic language is, fundamentally, an undisputed force for good. A lot of observers see the dominance of English as just a highly practical, almost inevitable evolution. Think about it. To communicate globally, you absolutely need a shared linguistic code, right? And English fits the bill perfectly because it already has such incredible reach. Proponents argue that it's actually taken on a supranational character. What that means is it isn't strictly tied to any one culture anymore. It's kind of like the metric system, but for words. It's a neutral vehicle. It lets scientists and scholars from totally different continents seamlessly share their discoveries, and ideally, it does this without actually threatening the vitality of local languages back home. And this brings us to a really great quote from scholar Anne Pakir back in 1999. She noted, "Language is no longer a barrier to knowledge, as ever larger numbers of people can access the products of research and participate in networks which go beyond the local." So the big takeaway here is that a shared linguistic code supposedly tears down historical and geographical barriers. It empowers users to tap into a genuinely global web of knowledge. But Section 3, the academic publishing divide. There is a catch here. When we actually look under the hood at who is getting published, who is getting cited, and who is really succeeding, that ideal of a perfectly equal, barrier-free global community kind of starts to fracture. I want you to just hit pause for a second and consider this staggering statistic from the source data. Over 95%? 95% of all publications in the highly prestigious Science Citation Index are printed in English. Now, sure, a lingua franca makes sharing ideas way easier than a system where everyone speaks a totally different language, but the danger here is massive. Second language writers who might struggle with English risk being completely boxed out of global scholarship, and that deprives the whole world of incredible knowledge being developed outside of English-speaking hubs. Let's put some numbers to this. This data, calculated by Waite Gibbs for Scientific American, shows some really massive structural disparities. Back in 1994, a whopping 31% of all papers published in mainstream journals came straight from the USA. Japan was next, but they were way down at just 8%. And look at Brazil. Brazil has a massive university system, yet they came in at a mere 0.6%. These are just gut-wrenching disproportions, and they really cement America's role as the ultimate global academic gatekeeper. And that dynamic is exactly what scholars call the hegemony of English. It's honestly a lot like trying to get past a really strict bouncer at an exclusive club. It's not just about knowing English, it's about knowing the right kind of English. The gatekeepers for these top-tier, inner-circle journals frequently demand strict adherence to a very specific, native speaker rhetorical style. This puts up huge hurdles. Second language scholars are forced to navigate restricted writing styles, smaller vocabularies, and just the sheer exhausting extra time it takes to write in a second language, all just to publish their best in the West. Which leads us to Section 4, the threat to local languages. Because of this intense pressure for academics to publish their best work internationally, we're seeing some really steep cultural costs inflicted on local indigenous academic traditions. Scholar Anna Moranin introduces what she calls the cultural rainforest argument, which is just a beautiful metaphor. She points out that our rhetorical practices actually embody our cultural thought patterns. So if we force excessive standardization into this single rigid English framework, we might actually be counteracting innovation. By making everyone fit their brilliant ideas into a standard Anglo-American box, we stifle creative thought. It's a really powerful reminder of why we absolutely need to encourage variety. And look, we're not just talking about abstract linguistic theories here. The sources show us that entire languages are taking a hit. For example, Swedish has virtually disappeared from academic publications, even though it was the historical vehicle for articulating advanced social democracy. Russian has been largely superseded in the former Eastern Bloc. German scholarship is actively losing its unique rhetorical devices like the excurse or digression. And non-Western languages like Swahili, Arabic, and Filipino, they are highly vulnerable. When the brightest scholars send all their best work to Western journals in English, their local research traditions just wither on the vine. John Swales talks about this as the loss of professionally marked registers. And think about what that actually means on the ground. If nobody writes like a medical professor or a high-level research scientist in their native tongue anymore, because all those roles are exclusively operating in English, well, the creative allure of that nation gets completely impoverished. You literally lose the ability to write a character who speaks like a professional in your own language for novels or movies or even parody. The culture itself just slowly loses its specialized genres. All right, Section 5, Reclaiming the Lingua Franca. So, is it all doom and gloom? Let's look at how this builds to a pretty fascinating synthesis. Are non-native speakers really just doomed to mimic native English conventions forever? Enter the concept of English as a lingua franca, or ELF. This is a game changer. It defines a variety of English used in contexts where literally no native English speakers are involved. And in this paradigm, traditional native speakerness holds absolutely no advantages. Academic users of ELF aren't trying to sound like standard British or American speakers. Instead, second language speakers are taking ownership of the language. They are prioritizing clear, comprehensible communication over traditional native norms. And you know, this makes perfect logical sense when you actually look at the demographics. Today, non-native speakers vastly outnumber native speakers globally. They make up roughly 80% of all English speakers. Because of that huge majority, they are organically creating new democratic norms for international academic communication. It's gotten to the point where native English speakers might actually be the ones who need to adjust their language just to be understood in these new international settings. This completely aligns with scholar Suresh Kanagaraja's resistance perspective. Rather than just passively accepting linguistic imperialism or feeling powerless, scholars in post-colonial communities can actively negotiate, alter, and even push back against these structures. They don't have to throw out English entirely. Instead, they can reconstitute it. They can literally remake the language in ways that are more inclusive, ethical, democratic, and most importantly, entirely their own. It's such a complex, constantly evolving landscape. So I'm going to leave you with this final, really provocative thought directly from our source material to ponder today. As English continues its massive sweep across global universities and research labs, is it ultimately a force that expands participation in knowledge networks, opening doors for everyone? Or by demanding a specific rhetorical conformity, is it actually a means of restricting that very access? Thank you so much for exploring this with me, and I really hope this changes how you look at the language of learning.